General of the Global Interfaith WASH Alliance, an international interfaith organization dedicated to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jim. She is president of Divine Shakti Foundation that runs free schools, vocational training programs, and empowerment programs. And she is also the director of the world-famous International Yoga Festival in the Parma Nikatan Ashram in Rishikesh, which has been covered in Time, CNN, and the New York Times, and other prestigious publications. Sadhviji is also a regular speaker at the United Nations and other large international forums. In fact, I think tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, Sadhviji will be speaking at the United Nations. And later this week, she will be doing an event together with Deepak Chopra. So we're really very fortunate to have her here today. Thank you. Her latest book, Hollywood to the Himalayas, or Himalayas, as they say in India, which I have learned, is a great book and very inspiring. It shines a light on the possibilities of how change happens. How you are going along one day, thinking you know who you are, and the next day, nothing is the same. Her book is the story of what happened to her and what is possible for any of us. And it will be a book signing following
the Instagram live stream. It started as soon as I speak. Just to make sure I can see the time, otherwise I have a habit of completely losing track of time. It's such a wonderful, wonderful blessing, wonderful joy to be with you all here today at the Present Day Club. And I love it because this is actually the key to spiritual growth, to spiritual awakening, to joy, to peace, living in the present. That which afflicts us, that affects us in such negative ways, the stress, the tension, is all rooted in the past and the future. This is why so many spiritual lineages, religious teachings of all of the different lineages have some methodology to bring people into the present. Whether we use words like meditation or contemplation or prayer or mindfulness, it's all about being in the present. So when I got the invitation to speak at the Present Day Club, I thought, wow, usually this is the message you have to give people is stay rooted in the present, be in the present. And here we have an entire club. I realized, of course, when it was founded and named that it had a slightly different connotation, but nonetheless, here we are in the present day, in the Present Day Club, and as we are focused on issues and topics that are relevant to the present day, well, nothing is more relevant than our internal state of mind. because we can only bring to the world what we have. And so whatever we are working for, I had really everything that we're told one needs in order to be happy, in order to be successful. From the outside looking in, you would have said, this woman has everything. And yet on a very deep level, I suffer. As so many of us do in so many ways, where everything on the outside is perfect. We've got the opportunity, we've got the privilege, we've got the money, we've got the education, we've got the right home in the right area of town, we go to the right parties, we belong to the right clubs, we do all of the right things. We have all of the right things. And yet, there's something within us that causes us to struggle and to suffer. And we then do some variation of looking for something to ease that pain. And whether we turn to alcohol, whether we turn to drugs, whether we turn to food, whether we turn to shopping, whether we turn to gambling, whether we turn to Facebook, whatever it may be, we turn to something to pull us out of that pain that we are feeling in that moment, that sense within ourselves of this moment is unbearable. And for me, by the time I was 25, I had gotten to a point where actually I was doing quite well. I had learned to really manage my life. I was actually managing my pain, managing my stress, managing my suffering, managing my addiction, managing my marriage, managing my schoolwork, managing all of the things that we have to figure out how to manage in our lives, things that trigger us in a whole bunch of different ways. And I thought that managing
was actually the highest goal. That this is where we attain to get to. We learn to manage our lives. No one had ever said to me, hey, by the way, there's actually another possibility. By the way, you actually can be free of this pain, of this struggle. Simply managing it, simply having it under control, simply kind of white knuckling your way through life is not the highest goal. Actually, you are not this identity of the physical body. You are not your role. You are not your title. You're not your history. You're not what's happened to you. You are one with the divine. I had no idea. I was a 25-year-old academic who actually thought that I was doing great simply because I was managing things. And everyone around me was managing their lives. The dilemma was, on a very core level, as I look back, I didn't trust. And until and unless we can trust, we have no option but to white knuckle our way through life. I didn't trust myself, and I didn't trust the universe. And so every moment was a struggle. I felt like I've got to keep controlling, I've got to keep managing, I've got to micromanage. And so whether it was constant trips back into the kitchen to make sure that the coffee machine was off, whether it was, constant trips from halfway to school back home to make sure the coffee machine was off, whatever it was keeping me from being free. And at 25, I traveled to India, thinking that, hey, this management of one's life is as good as it gets, and okay, what's the big deal? And I know a lot of people who turn the car around halfway to go somewhere just to make sure the coffee machine is off. I know a lot of people who struggle with issues around alcohol, drugs, food, sex, their bodies. Okay, we're all managing. We're managing our relationships. We're managing our families. We're managing our expectations. But I ended up on an airplane to India with a backpack because my husband was on a spiritual quest. He wanted to go to India. I agreed to go only because I was a very strict vegetarian and I loved the food. And it's so funny 25 years later to look back and realize that I ended up making this life decision simply because I loved the food. And I highlight that for a moment because what I want to talk to you about today has to do with trusting ourselves, hearing that inner voice, connecting with an inner way of knowing that we all have, that is accessible and available to all of us, but we don't listen because we don't trust. And so there I was on the airplane to India, and I had an extraordinary moment because somewhere flying over the Southeast Asia, I said, this makes no sense. I'm traveling across the world to a place I know nothing about, that I have no interest in really going to, simply because they're not going to stick eggs or chicken or fish on my salad, simply because they understand what the word vegetarian means. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had fantastic vegetarian Indian food on our corner. There was no need to travel around the world. And so I took a vow on the plane, and the vow was that I would keep my heart. And I don't know where it came from. I wasn't somebody who usually thought like that, but there it was, out of the blue. To keep my heart open. And that moment is a moment that, even though I didn't know it at the time, transformed my life, because I was someone who lived in her head. I was always stressed, I was always anxious, I was always micromanaging, I was always 2 steps ahead of the current moment, like what else I have to do. My to-do lists, even in days before smartphones and reminders that I would get and alarms that I could set, I had a day planner. But it was filled. And I checked it all the time. I had to-do lists and I had things to get done, and I was always 2 steps ahead. What else I've got to get done? How long is something going to take me? Do I have time? And there I was, this hardcore academic in her mind, managing, controlling my life, suddenly taking a vow to keep my heart open, but I did. And it ended up serving me in the most miraculous way, because where I am today and the joy and the peace and the freedom that I have found is due 100% to keeping my heart open, to making choices that made absolutely no intellectual sense, but that came straight from an inner way of me. And so in Delhi, when I opened up a 500-page Lonely Planet guidebook and said, Rishikesh, it sounded nice. One could even justify that. It was near to Delhi. It wasn't so far. It had a beautiful river, beautiful mountains. I was already a yoga student. It was, the yoga capital of the world. Okay, my intellectual mind could wrap itself around that. And then I chose the hotel we were going to stay at in Delhi, in Rishikesh, which was the Green Hotel. Now, Rishikesh is a holy city. It means the whole city is vegetarian. So the descriptions of the different hotels sound remarkably identical. Singles, doubles, AC, non-AC, vegetarian restaurant. But I chose the Green Hotel because I was an avid environmentalist, and I had organized the first Earth Day celebration at Stanford and had volunteered for Greenpeace. And I thought, okay, the Green Hotel it is. So when we arrive in Rishikesh and the taxi drops us off at the footbridge and points across the river, about 400, 500 meters across the river, not a little stream, a massive river, and he says, you cross bridge, a footbridge, 400, 500 meters, you cross bridge. And of course we had all our luggage. We were going to be in India for 3.5 months. If I were not listening to my heart, I would have said, we hadn't given a deposit. I hadn't given a credit card to the hotel. We had just made a reservation. I would have said, you know what? Forget it. Why don't you take us someplace where you can actually drop us off at the front door? Why don't we not go to the only hotel in the entire city that requires us to schlep our luggage across an entire footbridge and then down another 400 meters on the other side? But I didn't, because I knew something had led me there, and I had made this vow. So there we are, carrying our luggage across the bridge, and we get to the hotel and put down our luggage, and I say, I'm going to put my feet in the river. I was hot, I was tired, we had traveled in, we had just carried our stuff across the bridge, because of course, there are boats, there are coolies, but the driver didn't mention it. He didn't say, oh, by the way, there's this motorboat that goes back and forth. He didn't say, there are these guys, and you give them the financial equivalent of nothing, and they'll carry your bags across the river for you in a wheelie thing. Didn't say that, just you cross bridge. So I say, I'm going to put my feet in the river. I was hot and tired. And I get down to the river, not knowing that this river is worshipped as the mother goddess, not knowing that the river is holy. And I had this extraordinary experience like a veil was pulled off of not only my eyes, but off of my entire way of knowing. And suddenly I could see and feel and know the perfection and the presence of the divine in the universe, and the perfection and the presence of myself as one with the divine in the universe. It wasn't a divine by some specific religion or form or name. It was irrelevant. It was just a presence, an infinite presence of the divine. And I was part of it. And it was so beautiful. And it didn't matter what I looked at. It began as I looked out over the river. But then as I turned my head and I looked at children and families and marble steps and telephone poles, it didn't matter. Everything was divine. And everything was part of this perfection in the universe, this oneness of spirit in the universe. And I burst into tears. And while it made no sense to my intellectual mind, it didn't matter. Because there I was with an open heart. And there I was ready and willing to feel that and to know that. And that became then really the catalyst for everything else that happened afterwards. Of knowing that I needed to stay there, knowing that I was meant to stay there, knowing that this was home. Having that awareness, that trust in this incredible universe, that this is where I was meant to be, even though it made no sense, but nonetheless it was true. And then, a few days later, as I was walking through the ashram that I now live in, but I was walking through it only because it's very clean and very beautiful. And it served as this alternate pathway between the river and the hotel I was staying in. And to my Western sensibilities, having a place that was clean and beautiful compared to an alleyway that was not so clean or beautiful was much nicer. And I'm walking through the ashram one day and I literally hear a voice that says, "You must stay here." Now remember, I was not a mystic. I was not a religious person. I was raised in a Reformed Jewish community. But religion was always about the culture and the people and the family. We went to synagogue because it mattered to the community, to my grandparents. I was bat mitzvah because it mattered to my grandparents. It was never about hear the voice of God. It was about be there with the community, honor the ancestors, honor the heritage, honor the community. So I never had heard voices. I didn't know anyone other than schizophrenics and Joan of Arc who ever had heard voices. And since I was pretty sure I wasn't Joan of Arc, and also pretty sure I had not suddenly become schizophrenic, I did what any self-respecting scientist would do, which is I ignored it. And then I heard it again, about 30 seconds later. "You must stay here." And I remembered the vow that I was going to keep my heart open. And if I hadn't taken that vow, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know if I ever would have looked up to a sign that said office. But because I had promised to keep my heart open, and here I was hearing a voice, I walked in and said, "I want to stay." And then about a week later, when the head of the ashram, the president of the ashram, finally returned, it turned out I was going to need his permission to stay. he was out of town. I kept coming back every day. Is he back? Is he back? Because, of course, every day they would say maybe tomorrow, which, if you ever visit India, might actually mean tomorrow in some cases. It might also just as easily mean, I have no idea, but tomorrow sounds good. Tomorrow should make you happy, which ultimately is my goal in the moment, to make you happy. So let's say tomorrow. So that was kind of more what it was like. They didn't actually know when he was coming back, but they kept telling me tomorrow. And eventually when he did, and I had this incredible experience of meeting him and being in his presence. When I left and I walked out planning to tell my husband that I had found this beautiful place for us to stay, and when we got back from the mountains, because we had made a plan, we were going to go to the mountains, and that when we got back from the mountains, we could stay. But instead, my feet ended up stuck to the ground. And I literally could not pick them up and walk out of the ocean. And in that moment, in that scene of being, this young white woman in the middle of an ashram, flailing my arms, trying to get my feet off the ground, I realized, I guess I'm supposed to stay. Now, I guess the universe that's not going to let me walk out literally wants me to stay. And then all of these remarkable things kept happening, because once you trust, once you learn to trust, and it's a lot easier than we think. Because of what I had experienced in my life, because of the trauma I had been through, I thought I had this ready-made excuse not to trust. Like, I am exempt from the teaching that one should trust or have faith because, hey, I've had these horrible things happen to me. But what I realized is, in our school, in workplace environments, we all learn this thing called the trust fall, right? And you fall back into the arms, you close your eyes and you put your arms out, and somebody's standing behind you. And even if you're doing it with the bully from the schoolyard, or your enemy, or someone in your office place, a colleague who you know hates you, nonetheless, you're gonna fall back because no matter how much animosity there may be between you, they're gonna catch you. They're not actually gonna let you just fall onto the ground and split your head. And if we can have that much trust for our enemies, our competitors, those who are against us, those we don't know, random strangers, right? Sometimes you get paired up with a random stranger, but we fall back. And to be able to trust fall into the universe. And it has amazing impacts. My husband finally decided he was going to go to the mountains anyway. And for me, I had one of the issues that I had experienced in my life was I had been abandoned by my biological father after being severely abused. I had then been abandoned. And so I had massive abandonment issues and had gone from boyfriend to boyfriend to boyfriend, ensuring that I was never alone. And having this panic at the idea of being alone. And so when he said, well, I'm going to the mountains anyway, and if you want to be with me, you're going to come. It was inconceivable to either of us that I would do anything other than go. And yet I knew I wasn't going to go. I knew I was going to stay. My feet had been glued to the ground. I had heard a voice. And inside me, even though it had only been a week since this had started happening, since I had had this experience, I knew that this trust fall into the universe, this trust fall into God, into the divine, into my higher self, was one that was going to catch me. And I said, I need to stay. And he said, well, I'm going. And I said, okay. Have a beautiful time. And it sounds small, but it was huge. Yeah, it was huge. No one who knew me could believe that I had actually let him just head off into the mountains. And that I was going to stay back in a place where I knew no one, didn't speak the language. Days before smartphones, days before mobile phones. Not quite sure when he was going to come back. But I wasn't scared at all because I had found that holy of the universe. And as the years have gone by, and as I've known, this is the life path I am meant to lead. As absolutely inconceivable as so many parts of it have been, what I have found is the universe never lets me down. And it doesn't mean that everything goes according to the way you want it. There's no spiritual, religious, scripture teaching I know of in any religion in which God says, have faith in me, and you'll never get sick, you'll never die, nobody you love is ever going to get sick or die. You'll never get fired from your job, you'll never get divorced, the stock market will never crash. Those are not the assurances that we get given. What we get given is, have faith. And you will never crash, regardless of what is happening outside of you. You will stay in peace, anchored, grounded, in joy, not thrown around by the oceans of the waves of the ocean of life. And that's been the most extraordinary lesson for someone who never trusted. To know, oh my God, there is this thing called grace. And then it's amazing because lastly, in conclusion, for me, I'm a nature person, which is what brought Rishikesh to begin with, the river, the mountains. And before going to in the mountains, in nature. And when you look around, when you look at nature, from which I take a lot of lessons, whenever I'm confused about something, I always look to see if is there a teaching in nature? And what I have found is there's always teachings in nature. And every morning, watch the way that flower petals open to the sun. Watch the way that a caterpillar climbs the tree and goes out onto a branch and weaves itself into a cocoon, having no idea what's coming next, never having seen anyone become a butterfly, right? Mom, dad, uncle, aunt, I mean, everyone that it's ever seen go up the tree has never come back. And yet, it goes. And then it allows itself to get liquefied, having no idea, again, what's coming next. Look at the way that a seed sprouts into a tree. Look at the way that a tree knows that it needs to grow sideways, right? If you've ever taken a walk in nature, eventually you'll see a tree that instead of growing straight up like most of them do, grows sideways. And it's the most extraordinary thing because every once in a while, in order to get light, it has to grow sideways. Like that tree somehow knows as it sprouts out of the ground, if I go straight up, I won't survive. I cannot grow the way that every other tree in this grove has grown. My light is over there. And so somehow it knows how to do that. And when I look at nature, I realize that intelligence, that wisdom, that grace, that presence that is there for the caterpillar, for the flower, for the tree, successfully micromanage and control our lives. But we're here to trust fall into the universe and to hear that call from within and to notice when our feet metaphorically get stuck to the ground somewhere, that we're meant to stay or that we're meant to do. And to trust that wisdom and that knowing that guides everything in the universe. And 25 years later, again, as I said, it's never let me down. Doesn't mean you don't have difficult times, but it means you know this is the way I am supposed to live. This is my purpose. This is the way, quite literally, to my life. And that wisdom is there for all of you. And all you've got to do is listen to it. Just listen to it. Because it's there. And I could go on, but that's why I gave myself a clock. I want to make sure that we have time for questions and answers, and we're just at half an hour. So I'm going to stop here and to open it up to any questions that any of you may have. And I don't know whether looked like there was a second cordless mic, but if not, you could also just speak loudly. The room's not that big. Yes, of course.
I think one of the hardest, I'm just wondering if meditation was one of the first, when you stayed at the ashram, you probably had to learn how to meditate, and that can be very challenging. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And your practice?
The practice of meditation. So I was actually saying that next time we have to plan for a time that isn't immediately after lunch, because then we can have a meditation, but immediately following lunch, there's no wrong time to meditate, but nonetheless, immediately following lunch is not a particularly easy time, because I imagine in a couple of minutes everybody would be fast asleep. So the practice of meditation is a practice that gets us in touch with the truth of who we are. A lot of times we think about it as this very, very complex, esoteric thing that requires just the right amount of this and just the right amount of that, and you're walking this very tenuous line between the right way and the wrong way. And what I would say is there is no wrong way to meditate, unless you're making a shopping list, unless you've hit the snooze button and gone back to sleep, unless you don't meditate. That's the only wrong way to meditate. Otherwise, any form of meditation is right. What it does is it enables the mind to be quiet of all of the other voices. So when we speak about listening to that inner divine voice, that intuition or higher knowing, higher self. The dilemma, as most of us know, if you've ever tried to meditate, is there's a lot of voices in your head. And they all sound like they're coming from the inside. And how to know? One of the voices saying, shh, shh, be quiet, I'm trying to meditate. And the other voice is saying, see, you can't even do this meditation thing right. You are stupid. You're never going to get there. The other voice is like, didn't you leave the coffee pot on? And there's so many voices. And so what meditation does is it enables us to quiet all of the other voices so that we can actually find and hear that true inner voice. I think about it like if you've come home from a hard day, stressful day, a long day, and you decide you're going to get in a hot bath. It's going to relax you. Well, before you get into the sudsy tub and you get to go, what do you have to do? This is a question. Non-rhetorical.
Run the water,
Run the water. Yeah, what else do you have to do?
get undressed.
Get undressed, right? You've got to get naked. If you get into that sudsy, beautiful tub, in your suit and tie, in your shoes, in your dress, in your hat, it's very likely you are not going to have the moment. Doesn't feel so good to be in the tub with all your clothes on. And what meditation does is it enables us to literally take off that which is not self. All of the false identities, the ones that say, oh, I am my career, I'm the doctor, I'm the lawyer, I'm the engineer, I'm the CEO, I'm the president. The relationships, I'm so-and-so's wife, I'm so-and-so's mother, I'm so-and-so's daughter, and all of the baggage that comes with that. The roles that say I'm this color, I'm this race, I'm this religion, I'm this size, I'm this shape. I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too fair, I'm too dark. It enables us to get beyond all that, into a place within us that just is. That just is. And what you find is that that which just is perfect. There's nothing else for it to be. But it removes all those layers. So yeah, meditation was a huge part. But also what I would say is that along with the meditation, the other huge part was the service. And they go together very, very beautifully. Because when you meditate, you lose that border, that boundary of the sense of self, right? So all of that falseness that I was speaking about, the size, the shape, the color, the race, the religion, the relationship, the role, the title, the history, the identity, all of that is associated with this physical body. It ends here, then there's this empty space, then you're over there, and you end there, an empty space, she's there. When we meditate, that border and boundary between us and the world dissolves. We are one, because we're not the physical body. We're not the roles, we're not the relationships, we're not the responsibilities, we're not the stress, we're not the history. We are spirit, we are soul, we are consciousness, we are love. And that's not bounded by the physical body. And so you experience a sense of oneness and connection with all of creation, with the world, with God. However your spiritual practice or lineage or thought may conceive it, it doesn't matter. But then when you open your eyes from your meditation, that truth doesn't go away. And so the action component becomes the most natural aspect. When I have recognized that you and I are one, and I open my eyes and you are suffering, well, then I'm going to respond to your suffering the same way that I would respond to my suffering. If I stood up from meditation and my hip was really hurting or my knee was really hurting, I would rub it, I would do something, maybe I'd go get a massage, maybe I would put on a brace, maybe who knows what I would do depending on how badly it hurt. But I would do something. In the same way, the pain and the suffering of the world becomes ours, not in an, oh my God, I am burdened by the pain of the world, but just in an awareness that we are not separate. And so whether it's children dying of starvation, whether it's women dying in childbirth, whether it's polluted water, whether it's trees being cut down, we understand itself, and so we serve. And so the meditation and the service really go together very, very beautifully. And in fact, if someone is not serving with devotion and dedication, the teaching is always, there's something wrong with your meditation. It's not there's a problem with your service, it's there's a problem with your meditation. If when you stand up off that cushion, you are not asking the universe, as St. Francis of Assisi says so beautifully, "O Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." Right? I mean, that's the prayer. How can we be instruments, tools, vehicles, vessels of peace, of love, of healing, of service, in whatever way flows through us? And so that meditation and service component have both been the two sides, but they're not really separate. They interweave with each other, aspects of my spiritual path and life. Yeah, other questions? Fern.
So, thank you. I made a list of questions. And those of you who know me know them pretty much paperless, so that's why I have my laptop open.
Great.
I'm sorry.
Nothing to be sorry about.
But first question is that, or comment, is most of us can't travel to Rishikesh, to an ashram, and experience a transformation along a spiritual path. So do you have any thoughts about how we can change our own energy so we can find out who we truly are beyond our physical body?
Absolutely. The joy of writing Hollywood to the Himalayas was twofold. On the one hand, it was the joy of sharing my spiritual adventure. So your 25-year-old white and Jewish academic backpack and ends up taking vows of monastic renunciation and becomes, a Hindu holy woman. Well, that's a story. So one aspect was just the fun of sharing, like how that happened, what that adventure was, because it was an extraordinary adventure. And it was an adventure not just on the cultural and religious level, but it was an adventure of healing, of learning to let go and forgive. That was the very first prerequisite. The first instruction I was given was stand in that river and give your pain to the river. Forgive him. And don't come out of the river until you do. So, one element of the joy of writing the book was sharing that journey. Here is how it happened for me. Here's where it's fun. Here's where it's fascinating. Here's where it's an adventure. Here's where it's really deep. Here's where it's really painful. Here's where it's really funny. Here's where it's really painful. Here's where it's really, and back and forth, because that's what life is. But the other aspect that was really a blessing of writing the book was the arc that wasn't the physical arc. The arc that was the arc of way of thinking, which is available for all of you. You think about the Hollywood way of thinking that says, I am this body, I am its size, its shape, its color, its history. I am what has happened to it, my challenges, where I've been harmed, where I've been abused, where I've been betrayed. I am the things I've done, the mistakes that I feel horrible about. I am my history, I am the whole identity. That's the Hollywood way of thinking. I am bounded by this physical being. And then there's what you can think of as the Himalayan way of thinking, which is you have a body, but the body is the vehicle for your awakening. The body is the vehicle for you to experience and interact with this extraordinary creation, this extraordinary life. But it isn't who you are. And that is a shift that every single person can make. And that was for me really the joy and the goal in the book was for people to understand, to get as they read it, oh, I can do this. Okay, it may not be the Ganga River that I'm sticking my legs in, but I've got something I'm holding on to. I've got a pain, I've got a grudge, I've got something due to which I think I cannot be free. Something that has happened to me, or through me, or around me, due to which I am not able to fully experience and embrace joy and peace and freedom. So we all need to learn to forgive and let it go. Whether you're standing in the Ganga River, whether you're standing in any river, I don't know what the nearest river around here is, but whatever it may be, whether you are standing in your bathtub, whether you are standing in a church, in a synagogue, temple, doesn't matter. We all need to let go. And we all can learn how to trust fall into the universe, how to open our hearts to grace, how to experience life through giving and serving, rather than about what am I gonna get, how am I gonna suffocate in a way the self through all of that which I'm dumping on it, rather than letting the self experience its own fullness.
I have a question. Yeah, I just want to say I just finished reading your book a couple of days ago, and I highly recommend it. You all should buy it. It's one of the most powerful memoirs I've ever read. It's beautifully written. It's full of heart and soul, and it's a great story. But there's so many things that went through my mind reading it, and one is that you started out as this very type A overachiever. I mean, very highly accomplished, and then you find yourself in this ashram. You find yourself in this place, and in some ways, and you actually talk about this later on in the book, you are still that overachiever. You're still that type A person. You have accomplished. You haven't been. You're not a person to brag, but you have accomplished amazing things, and you work very, very hard. And so I would just love to hear a little bit of kind of how that has come through you, that sense of what is the essential you. Are you still that person? Is that something that you grapple with? Is that, just sort of from there to here? And the other part of that is what comes next. I'm dying to know. Thank you.
Sure. My instinct is we should probably take this as the last question. I don't know what our timing situation is like. Okay. So we'll take this as our last question, but I will be here for a little while afterwards to sign books. And so if you have a question that we didn't have time to take, I'm happy to be here for a little while afterwards. It's an extraordinary thing because we think when we are that type A, which by the way has nothing to do with achieving, interestingly. We think it does. We think in order to achieve, I have to be a crazy, stressed out, micromanagement, person with a death grip on life, or it's not going to happen. Like if it doesn't happen through me, in my way, according to my time frame, it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen right. And what's amazing that I've learned is, and again, here nature becomes my beautiful go-to guide, is wow, those flowers figured out how to blossom without me telling them to. Wow, that tree is giving apples and I didn't organize that. Look at how amazing nature is. That even with me not directing the show, it manages to function. And it's such an incredible lesson to realize, I'm not doing all this. There's a great story of a king who was a good king. And one day a holy man visited his kingdom, and he walks the holy man through the kingdom, showing him, and this is the hospital I've built, and these are the schools, and we're providing this housing for people, and this medical care, and this education. And these are the roads I've made. As they walk, they pass by a stream, and the holy man picks up a rock, and he says to the king, tell your guys to break this rock. The king's like, all right, kind of a strange request, but when a holy man tells you to do something, you do it. So he gets his soldiers to break the rock. They open the rock, and there's this beautiful, nutrient-rich pool of water in the rock. And inside, there's this little frog living in the nutrient-rich pool of water. And the holy man says to the king, and did you organize this also? Did you provide this for the frog? And it's such a beautiful teaching because you realize, oh yeah, there is an intelligence in the universe. And so for me, it's been a beautiful lesson that it's not about doing or not doing. It's about doing, but recognizing that I am just a vehicle, I'm a vessel through which it happens. And yeah, sometimes it may happen exactly the way that in my mind I had anticipated it was going to happen. And sometimes it doesn't. And to recognize the okayness of that my vision, my way, isn't the only one. It isn't even necessarily the best one. And that there is this intelligence, this flow of the universe. And so we show up. We show up every day with our fullness of our attention and our intention and our skills and our abilities and our time and our energy. Use me, universe. And sometimes we get used in one way, and sometimes we get used in a whole other way. But all we can do is show up as that tool, as that instrument. And it's a beautiful lesson to keep doing, to keep achieving, but recognize it's just grace. It's just grace. It's just grace. And so, yeah, the lesson is never about don't do, but it's about recognize that it's happening through you rather than by you. And, whatever is in the will of the universe and the will of the divine, ultimately that's what's going to happen. Can we just be those vehicles and vessels for it? You can stand over an apple seed shouting, oranges, 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 as much as you want. It's not going to happen. And And then your choice becomes, well, either to be frustrated and miserable because for God's sakes, why won't this seed give me oranges? Or to recognize, oh, all right, I guess today is apple day. All right, I guess the question today is, what can we do with apples? And then you figure out what to do with apples. And it's been a beautiful, beautiful lesson. And that is what's next. I mean, that for me is always the prayer. It's just, oh God, let me be an even clearer vehicle vessel for whatever needs to flow. Let my heart just be even more open in courage, in grounding, in anchoring. And that was, lastly, that was a huge part of the book, because to share the nitty-gritty details that I share in the book, this is not done. This is not done by religious leaders. It's not done in Eastern cultures. But I did it because I realized it needed to be done. It needed to be done because people thinking that somehow I was cut from a different cloth, and somehow it was easy for me to find joy and peace and freedom and love because I didn't know pain and suffering and trauma and difficulty. That didn't serve them. Not only wasn't it true, but that it actually prevented them from stepping up to the plate of their own lives. And that I needed people to know, yes, I know suffering. And I know freedom. And if I can, so can you. But that's the, okay, God, use me, all right? This is a little bit more vulnerable than I had intended. I remember when I finally finished the book, the way that I write is I just close my eyes and I type. Quite literally. I don't have outlines or plans. I just literally type. And I typed it chapter by chapter, not even chronologically. I just, whatever was flowing that day flowed, and then we wove them together chronologically. And when I finally stood up, having finished it, I literally out loud said, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. This was not the story in the way I had intended to tell it. I mean, I really had thought the book was going to be just a longer version of my TED Talk. But I realized, okay, this was the universe flowing through me because this was actually what was needed. And with that, because no matter what joy, what peace, what freedom on so many levels we find, never free from time. And so I want to stick to that. We're just at exactly an hour. So I hand it back over to you with great gratitude for having this beautiful opportunity to be with you today. And I will be here for a little while to sign books and answer anything that you didn't have a chance to ask.
I'd also like to mention that, well, first of all, thank you so very much. And 100% of the proceeds of the book goes to nonprofit humanitarian efforts. So just want to add that.
For the women and the girls in the Himalayas, and the environmental work, all of that work that we're doing, it goes to that. Thank you so much.
Such a delightful.